So hi, Evan. Thank you so much for doing this interview in the first place. How are you doing during this kind of weird and fascinating at the same time times?
Doing all right, hanging in there. It's strange. It feels like time is simultaneously stopped and is also moving really quickly at the same time. But it's been okay. We just trying to stay busy. Trying to keep doing things to keep myself sane. Going for walks and things like that, so I don't get too much cabin fever. But yeah, doing all right.
How is the situation there where you live? Like, do you have like a strict lockdown, or is it quite all right?
It's like a moderate lockdown. It's not anything too strict. I live in Massachusetts, so we just entered like a phase where they're starting to reopen some necessary businesses like manufacturing, construction companies, and I think like places of worship and things like that. But they haven't opened any restaurants or anything any place that I would go. So I'm still mostly just kept inside, except for I try to go for hikes and stuff where there's still not too many people but get outside. But so for all intents and purposes, I'm still pretty locked down. Luckily, I work from home, so that it's not like too different than my normal life, but you know, it's nice to be able to go out on weekends if I want. So that's been a little weird, but it's been okay.
Yeah, and of course you're also busy promoting the new album.
Yeah.
I also noticed that you recently released like a quarantine session video for Hope and Shadow. Can we expect more of these initiatives in the future?
Um, Hopefully. I don't want to guarantee anything because we're kind of just doing things as they come. We're just kind of taking what we can given our schedule, and if we have time, basically we're doing it. So I'll say that tentatively we're we're hoping to do at least one or two more if we have the time. But no, I don't want. That's not a guarantee. But it was really, I mean, it was really fun to do the first one because we've never done that sort of thing where we each recorded from our own home studios and compiled it, and it's a nice way to stay active. So if we have time, we'll definitely try to do another one.
It was also really interesting to see how many instruments and such are involved in the sound. How many instruments do you guys play collectively? Do you have any idea?
Oh, geez. I don't know. I mean, I would say that probably somewhere along the lines of like 10 or 15, something like that. I mean, and that is to varying levels of proficiency. It depends on uh, how you how you'd consider actually being able to play an instrument versus just being able to play a few things on an instrument. But Wayne was really the champion of that video because I would say that Wayne is probably the most multi-instrumental player of our group because he played some mandolin, he plays lap steel guitar, which is something that none of us do. And he also has an instrument in that video that he made himself, which is he just calls it a lap harp. It's kind of actually funny enough. It's a little bit inspired by the Finnish kantele. I don't know how you say that.
Kantele, yes.
Yeah. But it's a little bit inspired by that instrument, but not quite. It's kind of a weird other sort of lap harp that he made. So that was really cool, and he's actually hoping to maybe make some more instruments in the future, which I think would be really cool if we could start to incorporate more like custom built things that don't necessarily sound exactly like other things and incorporate that into our music. That's kind of cool. But yeah, I don't know. If we can kind of play it, we maybe just try to figure out a way to sneak it into our music.
Is there any instrument that you would still like to learn?
Ooh, I've always really wanted to learn the violin, the fiddle, but it's so hard. Like I've tried picking one up like a few times, and I can just tell that the learning curve is so vast that I don't know if I'll ever actually have the patience to do that. Something more realistic, like a stringed instrument or something. Like I do play some mandolin, and I'd like to get better. And some other stringed instruments like the banjo and things like that. I've always kind of had a little bit of an interest in. So yeah, I don't know. Basically, yeah, those are the main ones I can think of.
Obviously, we're also here to talk a little bit about the re-release of Failing of Imagination. So I first would like to congratulate you with the recent deal with Century Media. Can you tell us a little bit more about how they found out about you?
It was a lot of different things. It was kind of honestly, right after we did the first release, the independent release of the album, there was just sort of a whirlwind of people coming in at the same time. It was kind of funny because before we released Veil of Imagination, we really had a hard time contacting anyone or hearing back from anyone that we attempted to contact. And but we released Veil, and we worked with Adrenaline PR company here in the States, and I think they definitely really helped. It was the first time we ever hired a PR company, so I think that definitely helped a lot, which is probably something we should have done earlier, but we're learning as we go. And so they really helped, and I know they helped reach out to some people. And then beyond that, we got on the cruise, the 70,000 tons of metal cruise in January, and I know that helped our name get to a few more people. I actually just, right before I spoke to you, I just had an interview with Mike from Aardschok magazine in the Netherlands, and he was on the cruise, and he helped introduce us to a couple people, and he definitely kind of vibed for us and gave our names to a couple different A&R people, so he helped. And so it was kind of a lot of things at once, really, and it's kind of a when it rains, it pours sort of situation. And yeah, and then we were able to have a couple different discussions with a couple different labels at the same time, and try to get a deal that we ended up being pretty happy with, and we ended up with Century Media because, I mean, first of all, the terms of the deal were looking the best, but also they also had a certain level of enthusiasm, I think, towards our music. Like when they reached out to us, they just seemed really like they felt like they really genuinely liked the music. Not that the other people didn't, but they just really expressed to us like how much they personally felt like they liked the music. Maybe they were just better at selling themselves to us, but anyways, we just felt really good about working with them. So glad it worked out.
Wasn't it like, how was the feeling amongst you guys? Because it is a bit ironic that you first went through this whole process of independently releasing an album, which is also quite complicated at times, but now after the release, labels got interested.
Yeah, I mean, I think we accepted it. It was definitely a little bit bizarre. It was I want to say, I mean, it was definitely, for the years prior, it was definitely pretty frustrating to try to get people to respond to emails and try to get in contact with anyone. So I guess on one hand, it was a relief, but it was also like, it was kind of funny because some of the labels and other people that we had reached out to before were the people that finally got back to us after Veil of Imagination came out, and we had shown some of them the record like months prior before we released it ourselves, and I guess they hadn't. I think that labels and A&R people and all those sort of industry people, I think they need to see some of the success that you can garner yourself before they really grab onto you. So I think that's basically what happened. Is we released it and we had some PR, and then the response from our audience was good enough that people finally came around. So it was mostly just relieving, honestly. It was mostly just like it's like, finally, thank you.
Yeah, I noticed, and that's how I actually discovered you, is that you got a fair amount of attention from online publications all around the world. But how is it now to have evolved from that kind of underground prog band to like signing with one of the biggest metal labels of the world?
It's great. I mean, we're still in definitely like a transitionary period right now. Like it's been a lot of work. It's been, a lot of, I think, getting onto a label and then finally getting yourself established is still a lot of work in a transition, because you have to change your whole process basically. Like we've done it a certain way. We've done the independent game now for it was 8 years, and so we're still kind of in the process of changing how we do certain things, and giving up some of our power to them, which is sometimes a little scary. Like when you've been doing things your own way for 8 years, to give up some of that power is like a little freaky, but at the same time, it's also relieving, because there's only so much we can do, and if we keep growing as a band and want to keep our opportunities coming and grow those opportunities and get more fans, the workload just becomes too much to handle it on ourselves. So I think that this is the perfect time to really start getting help from a label and from other people, because the workload's just getting bigger. So it makes sense, and it's exciting too, for sure.
So now people get, of course, the opportunity to discover your music to Century Media. What can you tell them about the band? Like, how would you describe the sound yourself? Because I think it's kind of impossible. It's very difficult to describe myself. So.
Right. Yeah, it's a little hard to describe for me too. I feel like it's definitely been a process over the last 8 years. It's evolved in a lot of ways. Like we began as a much more straightforward folk metal band, symphonic folk metal band, and that we definitely were much more just starkly in that specific camp of music. But I think as time has gone on, we've sort of like part of that essence has stayed and part of it has transitioned. Because in a lot of ways, I think you could look at Veil of Imagination and still say it's sort of still a symphonic folk metal record in a lot of ways, but the songs are different. Like I think that we've kind of taken a lot of the sonic palette, a lot of the aesthetics, a lot of the instrumentation that we established on our first record, but we've just kind of tried to mess with the songwriting. We've sort of just tried to use different harmonies and melodies and kind of create a slightly different atmosphere than we did originally, but we still have a core that's still like that symphonic side, that folk side. And I don't know. I mean, I guess, obviously it's become more progressive sounding for sure, and a lot of our influences are more progressive sounding bands, but I don't know. I also have a hard time just calling us a prog band too, because we're not too interested in being overly complicated. We're not too interested in, being too flashy with our instrumentation. We still care a lot about just songs and songwriting and atmosphere. So I don't know. It's just some weird in-between world of those things, and it's a little bit hard for us to put a label on it. So.
You often mention in interviews, and I read it in the press release as well, that like fans tell you that your music is pretty hard to grasp, like from the first listen, that it's a slow burn. Does that affect the songwriting process in a way? Like, do you get why they feel that, and like, do you perceive it yourself that way as well?
I only have ever perceived it like after the fact. It's always been something that I never really think about it while I'm writing or while we're making the record. We're just kind of trying to do what we like, and just trying to make a cohesive, compelling record from beginning to end. And it's one of those things that once people listen to it and then they tell me that and I get that sort of feedback, like I'm kind of like, oh, okay, I kind of make sense now that I think about it that way. I guess it's the same reason why we don't release the first song of the album as our single. You know, we release a song in the middle that kind of catches your ear a little bit more quickly. So I guess if you're gonna listen to the record from beginning to end, you're not gonna get hooked like you would if you listen to that single. But I don't like records that I prefer records that make you kind of sit with it and kind of that test your patience a little bit, because I feel like if it tests your patience for the first few minutes and it makes you kind of sit and pay more careful attention, then you'll be invested in the whole record. Like you're not getting like you're having to wait for the satisfaction. Like you don't get immediate satisfaction from just the first 2 minutes, so therefore you have to invest yourself in the whole record to get something out of it, and hopefully that is a deeper satisfaction. But I don't know. I feel like that's almost been more of a weird intuitive thing for us rather than like a precise goal. I think that's just how we make music, and that's just how it turns out.
Like for me, the album is pretty important to listen to it from like the beginning until the end, because it just makes sense to do it that way than any other way. But in these times, singles are getting more and more important, and a lot of bands just release singles instead of albums. How do you see the future for you guys? Are you still going to keep to the traditions of metal, basically?
I don't know. I mean, albums of what we've always made. Albums are what we know. So it's like it's hard to think about ever not making like a big cohesive record, because that's growing up. That's what I listen to when I think about making music. That's just how my brain how I wrap my head around it. But at the same time, I'm not like completely opposed to a different way of thinking. Like, so a lot of our songs are kind of microcosms of their own. Like I would say that, from the last record, like the first song, Unimaginable Zero Summer, like even though that song is the beginning of the record, it kind of sits on its own too. Like it's kind of its own, it has its own big arc and beginning and end, and you could almost just take that as it is on its own and not necessarily need the rest of the record if you so decided. So I don't know, maybe we could try a thing one day where we release, I think we're always probably going to make somewhat long songs, but maybe those can be released individually and they can be their own little microcosms that get released separately or something. I don't know. And then maybe at some point they get compiled onto a compilation record. I don't know. I'm open to it. I've honestly haven't thought through it enough to give you a clear answer, but I'm open to it.
Would you say Veil of Imagination is like a concept album?
I would say it's not a concept album in the sense of like there's not like a really cohesive story. It's not like a movie. There's not like a character that gets that follows a story. I actually Sleep at the Edge of the Earth, the previous record, was a little bit more conceptual in that sense. Like when I was writing the lyrics, I kind of envisioned like a singular narrative of one character following a certain path. But Veil of Imagination, the only thing that's really conceptual about it is that the lyrical themes are very related, and I basically was in a very similar headspace when I was writing all the lyrics of the songs. So, and they are all they're basically just little tangents on one core idea of just, I mean, it's a little hard to explain, but like basically the lyrics just kind of are me trying to analyze my own anxiety and neurosis from like a third person perspective, and kind of just trying to step outside of my own head and view the inner workings of my brain from a bit of a metacognitive standpoint. And all the lyrics definitely stem from that, and they're just little different iterations of that. So in that sense, it's conceptual, but not in like a narrative story sense.
Yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense, because I was going to ask, I feel that the lyrics, they like if you read through them without listening to the music, they look a lot like kind of poems or something like that. But how do you usually start go about writing them? Do you start with an idea, or do you just let it flow naturally?
I usually start with an idea. I've like I usually, at least for Wilderun, for other things I've written in different ways, but for Wilderun specifically, I've always wanted to make sure that it's something personal and it's something that has some meaning to me. At least for this record and the record prior. The first record we did was a completely different thing. That was just folk tales and a totally different game altogether. But the previous two records, I just kind of began with an idea of something that has either been just on my mind a lot or something that has been pervasive mentally throughout my life in the recent years, and then just try to hone in on one concept in that realm and then just kind of let it flow from there and then see what happens. Sometimes that comes out as a metaphor, sometimes it comes out as something more literal, sometimes it's very personal, and then sometimes it's a little bit more of a third person perspective. So yeah, but it always begins with some sort of concept, and then I just try to riff on that concept. I've always had a little bit of a hard time just free flowing, just going like totally stream of consciousness. It always just comes out like a mess. But maybe, I'm also open to that. I've always kind of been curious to see if I could come up with something that way, but it seems harder to me.
The reason I discovered you guys is actually because I saw your promo photo floating around the internet, and because I'm a photographer, it was like very it instantly caught my eye. I was wondering if there is some kind of a story behind it, and how it somehow connect with the cover art as well, because they kind of match very well together.
Yeah, there wasn't like a big concept or anything, but I just contacted. I had been a fan of Karen Jerzik, the photographer. I've been a fan of hers for a while at that point, and I just had followed her on Instagram. I love all of her artwork, and it came time to get photos, and we already had decided on the album artwork, and I just knew that based on Karen's work that I loved her vibe and the atmosphere of her photos. So I was just like, let's just get her to do something. But I wanted to also give her some free reign to be creative. So basically, I showed her a couple of the demos of the Veil of Imagination material, and then showed her the cover artwork that we were going to use, and just said, here, just take this and do what you will with it, and can you just come up with something that feels like it's in the same world? And that's what she came up with. We went to her studio, and that's another thing that a lot of people don't understand, is that photo is not digital. It's not photoshopped at all. That's a real set. We went into her studio, and all the flowers and the mannequin hands and everything, she physically built that. And there was a frame that we all got in. We walked behind the portrait thing and got into the frame. So that's a real photo. And she just made that all herself, just based off of hearing our music and seeing the album artwork, and we loved it.
Yeah, it's a really powerful photo, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Unfortunately, with this pandemics, I guess you also had to cancel some shows, or that's at least what I read. Yeah. And we don't really know yet when concerts might be a thing again. A lot of bands, they come up with like alternatives, like streaming concerts. Is that also a possibility for you guys?
We've definitely considered it. It's it's definitely a technically somewhat difficult sort of thing. You need a budget for it. But we're definitely open to it. We also have the difficulty of not living all in the same state. Our drummer lives in North Carolina, which is about 12 hours south of here, something about like that. And then our other guitarist slash orchestrator lives in California, which is, 4 days from here. But he doesn't play in the live. We have a 4-person live setup, so we have kind of a weird thing where we have a 5-person band but a 4-person live setup. So we could theoretically still do a 4-person thing if we could figure out a way to do it. But I'm open to it. We just haven't figured out the technical ways to do it. We that's why we did the whole quarantine acoustic session thing, because that just seemed a little bit more feasible with given everything that our current situation. So that was kind of our first thought. But depending on how long this pandemic happens and how long until the next gigs can happen, then I definitely am open to it. We just got to figure out how to make it happen.
How do you actually see the future of music and live music? Do you think this COVID-19 is going to have an impact on playing live and how you play shows live and stuff like that?
It's hard to say. I definitely think for a while. I mean, all the festivals, all the big tours are all pushed back a full year now. It seems like everyone's just pushing everything a full year. So it definitely seems like at least for this year and maybe the beginning of next year, it's going to not be the same, just because even as the numbers, some of the numbers have started to go down a little bit so far, and some of the things are starting to reopen. But, unfortunately, concerts and festivals are like the worst possible situation. Like, even if you could justify going into a restaurant and like staying 15 feet apart from the other tables, it's hard to think about that ever working in a festival at a concert. Like I've tried to imagine like a weird festival concert situation where everyone stands 6-10 feet apart, and I just don't see it happening. It seems too bizarre. So I feel like until there's obviously a vaccine, as soon as a vaccine actually gets distributed and it works properly, that's the main thing that needs to happen. But maybe if they can figure out a way to test people like accurately enough, and if you get tested before you go into a venue and it has a high enough rate of accuracy, maybe that could do it. I don't know. It's so hard to say that I'm not going to hold my breath. I'm just going to say, okay, this year is probably shot, and I'm just going to try to be patient until the vaccine comes out. And if anything else happens, it'll be a nice surprise.
Are you planning to come to Europe at some point after this whole situation has kind of cleared out?
Yes, that's definitely that's been the main goal. That's been and we were hoping that we could. It's seeming like I don't know if it's been confirmed or not confirmed yet, so I don't want to say for sure, but it's seeming like our October things or European things probably aren't going to happen. And I just say that because I'm forgetting what has been announced or not. But so basically, next year is our goal, and hopefully, with everything getting rescheduled, everything getting pushed back, we can still be a part of that. And with this album re-release, hopefully that can be enough hype, and with the label and all of that, to help us get on 2021 festivals and tours. Nothing confirmed yet, but that's the main goal, and I'm feeling pretty good about it.
All right. I think our time is almost up, and I'm all through my questions anyhow. So do you have any last thoughts you want to share with people watching this video and your fans?
Nothing specific. Just, as always, just thank anyone who's watching. Thank you so much for continued support, and thank you for support. We have a lot of American fans who were planning on seeing us back in April, and they did not see us, but a lot of people still are supporting us online, and there's still, although we got a lot of pre-orders for the record coming out, and so just generally a big thank you to everyone who's still supporting us during this time, and supporting any other bands during this time, because it's tough. Bands make a lot of their living off of shows and festivals, so it's not an easy time. But it seems like, particularly the metal community, seems to really care about still supporting bands and just doing what they can to make sure that when this is all over, bands are still going and everything is still viable in some way. So anyways, that's all I can say is just thank you to everyone out there, and thank you to you for doing this and helping us out with, I mean, everything like this helps us out, get the news out there and gets the record news out there and everything. So thank you.